Hi everybody, my name is Renee. I'm excited to be able to speak with you all because this is kind of my passion project, and I'll explain. So I'm an employment attorney and I've been practicing law for 20 years this year, which blows me away. And I've been representing companies. Well, I used to represent employees that were suing companies for 13 years, and 6.5 years ago I started my own law firm. We're based in Calabasas. And I do the opposite, where now I represent companies to get into compliance with California law. So I want to tell you why I'm here, because obviously you guys are not here for corporation compliance issues. So what happened was soon after I started my practice, I have a very close friend he's a business lawyer, and he called me and he said, I have a referral for you. One of his best friends from college, who's now, they're all in their 60s. So his wife, parents had caregivers, and for years. And then the parents were both still alive, but the father needed additional medical services. So he can no longer be in the home. He needed to go into some sort of medical assisted facility. So the caregivers that they had were a family of Filipino workers. It started out with like this one woman who was their housekeeper, and then they said, oh, we need additional services because now my father's getting sicker, my mom's also getting sicker. So we need you to take care of my parents, cook for them, drive for them, clean for them. And then all of a sudden it became 24 hours. So she's like, oh, well, you can hire my brother and my sister and my uncle. And it became I think there were about 8 or 9 people that were working for this family. Well, when the father, and they were making good money, and it's all cash under the table, so it's very good money. And when he went into the medical facility, they obviously no longer needed that family. Well, they were alerted. I've learned a lot since then of how they were alerted, but they were alerted that they have rights and that they have not been properly classified as an employee. And so they sued this family, this couple. He was over 90 years old, and the wife was just under 90, and the daughter didn't know what to do. So they hired me, and when my friend asked me if I wanted to do this, I said, this is not what I do. I represent corporations. So I started doing a little bit of research, really just as a favor to him because he was a good friend of mine.
Yeah, you can slow down a little.
Thank you. I appreciate Thank you. Thank you. No, I really do appreciate that. Please tell me. I know, and I get excited and I talk faster. So I didn't think that it was appropriate for me to do this because that's not what I do. So I started researching it. And I was honestly shocked that there's no statutes, there's no laws that protect senior citizens in terms of hiring caregivers. And the mom and dad, who are literally in their 90s, close to 90 in their 90s, they were treated the same and had the same expectations as if they were the CEO of Walmart or Target or any corporation you could think of. And that was shocking to me. And there have been a lot of proposed legislation of how to try to get some sort of protection for senior citizens, but nothing has ever come through. So I realized it's really the same thing. The mom and dad are the employers, and those caregivers are the employees. So the daughter, Deborah, came to my office, and she took out butcher paper, like literally butcher paper, and unrolled it on my conference room table. And she was meticulous in her organizing skills. It was amazing. She had every employee on one side, and she had the hours and days that they were working. She created this construct of she paid $20 an hour for their regular hours. If they worked more than 8 hours, she charged this premium pay of $25 an hour. So she was trying to do the right thing, but really that's completely out of compliance. They weren't clocking in and clocking out. They weren't given overtime hours. They were denied all these things that an employee is supposed to have. They weren't given sick days, all of those things that you have to do when you're an employer. So we went in front of the labor board. There was $800,000 of liability because she had been doing this for so many years, but mainly because there's so many employees. And we get to the labor board to argue this, and the father is wheeled in his wheelchair. The mom was too sick to come, and he was very sickly but very sharp. So he knew exactly what was happening. It was devastating. This is all the money that he's earned his entire life, that he's wanting to give on to as his legacy to his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren. It was all on the table, just ready to give to these caregivers. On the other side was a few of the workers, and they had this woman that was there, and this is how I learned about this. She was this Filipino representative. These lawyers, these plaintiffs' lawyers, have mills. They have these law firms dedicated to this practice of going after elderly people for the purpose of, finding, because you can find it. If you look for a second, anybody who has caregivers, for the most part, are not doing this properly. So they have these law firms out there, and what they do is they hire these, because the Filipino community is a very strong caregiving community for whatever reason. So they send out representatives to the churches, to the Filipino churches, and they say, are you caregivers? Do you have family members that are caregivers? You have rights. Your family members have rights, and call this number. And then all they do is call the number, and then the lawyer takes it from there, and then they sue these families, and it's devastating. So I defended the claim. We ended up, because thank goodness the labor board takes into account good faith. So when they see that the employer is not trying to take advantage of the employees, that they're really trying to do the right thing and they are paying them even though they're not properly paying them, then they will mitigate. They'll bring down whatever damages there were. So I ended up settling for, I think it was about $100,000, which was a big win, but it's still $100,000. That was a big check for them to write. It was devastating. So after that is when I became very passionate about this. And so this is probably like 5% of my practice, because 95% is all of my corporation work. But I've spoken now in settings like this, mainly I think they've all been on Zoom except for this one. That's not true. This is my second one that's not on Zoom, but I've done this like maybe 5 times. So this has become something that I just feel that you need information. And if you have information on how to do this properly, then you can be protected. There is a lot to know. There's a lot of information, because for so many people, when you have somebody who needs caregiving, then it's the children that end up taking the onus of running the corporation, running those employees. And not all children, that are adult children that often have their own children themselves, they don't have a tremendous amount of time to be managing a corporation, but that's really what's necessary. So the question becomes, do you now go through an agency, or do you do this on your own privately? Doing it on your own is significantly cheaper. Going through an agency can be very, very expensive. And the reason is because the agency is acting as the employer, and they have to do all of the things that you would need to do, and they're trying to make a profit. So they're not just paying those employees, they need to make money, otherwise what's the point of starting a company? So many people come to me and they say, I don't want to pay for an agency, and so help me do it on my own. Alternatively, a lot of other people say, I want to do it through an agency, they have done it through an agency, and they still get in trouble. And the reason you can still get in trouble with an agency is because when you hire through an agency, the agency and the people, the employers, the ones that hired the caregivers, it's called joint employment. They're both employers for that caregiver. So just because you have the agency involved doesn't mean you have no liability. So I'm very, very hesitant to recommend agencies unless I can sign off that I've looked at their books and I know how they're treating their employees. Otherwise, I don't feel comfortable, because I've seen it backfire on people many, many times. But there are really, really good agencies out there, and I certainly don't know all of them, but I have done audits on a few, and I feel comfortable recommending those. But I just want everyone to know that hiring an agency is not the end all. You have nothing to worry about. You still have to make sure that they're doing it properly. So the presentations that I've given have all, yes?
Can you stop right there and clarify what the risk is of the joint employer? Because obviously people that use an agency, as you've indicated, think they've protected themselves because they're not the employer.
Mm-hmm.
So what creates the joint employer, and then what's the liability?
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the question. The question is, what does that exactly mean to have a joint employment relationship? It means that when those plaintiffs' lawyers who are these sharks, go out there and try to come after the employers, the seniors that are actually receiving the caregiving. So they will sue the agency, and the agency is the better defendant because they have more money typically, and they have insurance policies often. It's just an easier target. But whenever plaintiffs, and I'm saying this as a former plaintiff's lawyer, so I know for a fact that when you sue people, you sue everybody that has any potential liability. You don't just sue one person if there's multiple entities that you can come after. So the employer also has a role here because these caregivers are in their home, so there's liability there. And the agency will often want to bring in the employer because they can say, well, I told the caregivers that they can only work 8 hours, and it's not my fault that the employers told them, no, please stay for another 2 hours. And I didn't know, and they didn't sign off. I mean, whatever the case may be, there could be so many reasons why the employer is also liable. But all I can tell you for sure is that both parties will be named, and both parties will have to end up at the table. And I've asked agencies many times, I'm like, because there's a thing called an indemnification clause where you could put that into a contract, and the indemnification clause says, if the agency had that, they'd say, employer, you're contracting with us. If I get sued, or if you get sued, I'm going to indemnify you. I'm going to make sure that I take all that liability so you don't have it. No agency will do that. And the truth is, if I were the agency's lawyer, I wouldn't want them to do that. Because again, you have no control when that caregiver is in the house of the couple or the person, the elderly person. And so why would you want to take away your possible rights to go after the employer if they've done something wrong? So it's really, really complicated. I do think working with a very compliant agency, if you can afford it, if you have the money to do this, it is the easiest way to do it. Because what I'm going to tell you, because my whole presentation is about you want to hire a caregiver, let me teach you how to do it properly. And I'm going to give you a lot of information, hopefully slowly, and it's a lot. And even if you were recording me and played this back 5 times, it's still a lot. There's so much to know. And this is what my company clients that are with in-house counsel and human resources and have all of the resources in the world, they struggle. So how are people that aren't necessarily known educated business owners, they haven't owned a business before, maybe they have, maybe they haven't, there's so much to know. So that's what we're going to get into now. If any, yes?
One last question.
Please.
The prior topic, and your explanation is excellent. Can the employer, the people that are receiving the care,
right,
insure against that risk? Can they purchase some sort of an insurance policy?
Yes. So there's an insurance out there called EPLI. It's Employment Practices Liability Insurance. It's very, very expensive. A lot of my clients with a lot of money available to them, they don't even want to pay it. So it's a very expensive insurance. If I were owning an agency, I would never want to have that agency without that insurance. But as just 2 individuals in a home, just trying to get care for themselves, it's an expensive insurance. I'm not saying you shouldn't look at it. If that's an option, it's very protective. The premiums are high and the deductible is high. And oftentimes you won't get a deductible for less than $40,000. And I can usually resolve most employment issues under the $40,000, and that's irrespective of whatever the verdict or settlement is. So that they don't always cover that. They'll just cover attorney's fees. It just depends on the type of policy you have. So now we'll talk about, now you've decided that you don't want to go through an agency. If you go through an agency, this is kind of an irrelevant conversation at this point because the agency should be taking care of everything that I'm about to tell you. There's these things called the wage and hour rules. And that's what's going to be so critical in these caregiver lawsuits because it all comes down to wage and hour. Were they paid properly? What type of overtime were they given? And that's the biggest issue. luckily, there's no meal and rest break provisions in this wage order, which means, in a typical situation, you have employees and there's very strict rules about when you have to give them rest breaks and meal breaks. Before the end of the 5th hour, they have to eat their 30-minute meal break. And between the first 4 hours, like somewhere in the middle, they have to get their 10-minute rest breaks on both ends of that. And it's very specific. The reason that you have a reprieve on this, thank goodness, because that would be a whole other mess to have to unravel, is because if you're caregiving to an elderly couple and or elderly person, when you give rest and meal breaks, you have to make sure they don't do anything during that time. You have to take away all of their job responsibilities. Well, let's say somebody is falling in front of you. And you say, sorry, I'm on my 10-minute break. That's not gonna work. That would be a nightmare. So, and the reality is that the employees that do caregiving, they have a tremendous amount of break time that's embedded in their schedule, because typically a senior citizen in need of care is not actively running around that you're chasing after them and doing a million activities. It's a pretty chill job. So you don't have to worry about meal and rest breaks. It's overtime. Overtime is what kills people. So there is this thing called, you don't need to write this down, but it's the California Domestic Worker Bill of Rights. This is the only statute that's protective of the senior community in terms of employment. And what this says is that after 9 hours, you have to start paying overtime. In normal, non-caregiving world, it's after 8 hours. And it's usually after 12 hours that you have to give time. It's double time, because between 8 and 12 hours, you get time and a half. And between 12 plus, it's double time. Here, it's just time and a half after 9 hours. That's a really important thing to know. Sleeping time. So this is the killer, because so many people, out of the goodness of their heart, they say, look, we have a bedroom. It's available to you. It's a beautiful bedroom. And a lot of caregivers don't have they have, far commutes, or they don't have a good car that could get them to the home. And the ability for them to sleep there is a really nice benefit to these employees. Well, if you just offer them the bedroom, and then the caregiver knows that the seniors sometimes need help in the middle of the night. They need help going to the bathroom. They are worried if they get out of bed by themselves, they may fall. So you need to run up and make sure that they're protected. That's considered work, and you have to pay for those hours. So what that means is that people are on the hook for 24 hours of wages, which if you multiply that over months or years, very few people can afford this. This becomes an insane amount of money. And that's when you say this is ridiculous and we need to figure out something else. But the problem is that most people don't realize this, and then you get hit with this by those awful plaintiffs' lawyers later on, and that's all taken into account. There's ways around this, and I'm being recorded, and so I'm nervous to say this on the record, but there are ways around this. I'm gonna just tell you the lawful way, and then the way that I tell people, but it's like you have to be careful. So if you can show that during those sleeping hours that you never need to get up, that the caregivers can sleep through the night, if they wanna leave the house, they can leave the house, and that you're really just offering them a room for their convenience and not because you need them to do work for you. If you're able to show that, then I create these agreements called voluntary housing agreements, and it spells it out. They're giving this room just for the purpose of convenience. It's a mutual agreement that they want to sleep here. You don't need them to work, but they're just staying here. It helps in two ways. First of all, if you're able to put into writing that they are not required to do any work whatsoever during those 12, 15 hours of off hours, then you're not going to be on the hook for paying for that time. The other reason it's very helpful is because if you have that, you put into the agreement that living there is conditioned upon employment. Because what's happened in the past, shockingly, and I've dealt with this now twice, is that the employee lives in the home, the person passes away, and the children can't get them out of the house. And they say, I live here, I'm a tenant here. And then you have to go through formal eviction proceedings, which is a nightmare. And it's expensive. Just lawyers are expensive. So just going through that process is not something you want to have to do. It's so much better to put it in there that's conditioned, and then you don't they're not a tenant. They're an employee that has this benefit of living there. So that's the way around it. The reason I hesitate to talk about this on the record is because if the person is living in your home and in the middle of the night, you, the employer, you need to get up and you fall, you don't want that employee to be like, sorry, I'm not working and I'm not going to help you. Of course you want them to help you. If you're the child running this corporation, helping your parents make sure that they have proper care, that would be a nightmare to you. You feel so good knowing somebody's in their home taking care of them, and you want to know that they're available. So it's complicated. So you want them to be available, but you don't want to put into writing that they're available. You want it to put into writing that this is a choice that they're making to stay there and they don't have to sleep there. That's what's going to help you. So that's the main issue is the overtime. And so making sure that all you have to pay them is minimum wage. And minimum wage goes up every year, and it's getting to the point where it's very expensive to even just pay minimum wage. Right now we're at $15 an hour, and so time and a half of that is $22.50. And so just as long as you're documenting it, really, really important that you have timekeeping, that you could have a piece of paper. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, just a piece of paper where they clock in and they say, arrived 8 a.m., walked out of the bedroom at 8 a.m., whatever the situation is, and then left at 5 p.m., whatever it is. But you have to be, because those time records are like gold when you're defending a claim, because they're going to say no matter what, that they work 24 hours a day. And I've had situations where I've defended these claims where they've really argued 24-hour care when the person's like, I don't even know what they're talking about. These people left, every day at 4 o'clock, and we only use them 6 hours a day. Who knows? The other thing, I also want to talk about one of the ways around this, because overtime is where it gets really, really expensive. So you can hire, it's very often better to hire multiple people to stagger shifts. And so you have somebody working, if you need 12 hours of care a day, somebody's working a 6-hour shift, they leave and it's a small overlap, and then another 6-hour shift. It cuts away all the overtime, and it is definitely a more cost-efficient way of managing this. The worst part about this is that I get calls all the time where, often they'll say, all right, I heard you speak, I want you to set me up, I want to make sure that we're protected. But I have to tell you, our caregiver is like family, and they love us, and they would never, ever come after my family. And I'm a very positive person who sees beauty in people, truly, and it's really hard for me to grasp that people cannot be wonderful and amazing, but I've seen such horrible, horrible things. The worst situation I've ever seen, other than the first scenario I told you about, was where there was a family in West LA, and I was dealing with the niece and nephew. This woman had no children, but the niece and nephew were like her children, and they went out to the city every single week to visit this family and visit this woman. And the caregiver was a caregiver and like 3 of her sisters and the 4 of them, and it was like the most beautiful, this is what was described to me, the most beautiful relationship, where the 4 sisters came to every grandchild's birthday celebration. They had dinners every week. They did so much together, and they loved each other. Well, the problem is that these caregivers, they're in your home, and it's very, very unusual that somebody who has no money can hire a caregiver. Typically, if you really have no money, you're going to end up in some sort of state-subsidized assisted living facility or something of that nature, which is fine. But to be able to live in your home in your final chapters of your life is a luxury. It's a beautiful, amazing thing. And if you need care and you require assistance, to hire people 24 hours a day is a very expensive endeavor. So you're in your home and the caregivers are there seeing all of the jewelry that you have. They see how much cash, is possibly in the safe if you ever open the safe in front of them. They see the nice cars. They see the family members coming to the house and with their beautiful cars and all of their jewels on them. And even if you don't have a ton of money, I can promise you that the caregivers think you do. And I tell this to my corporate clients, that every employee thinks the boss is a gazillionaire, and it's just not true. I have clients that are pulling money out of their bank account every month to pay for payroll, and they could barely make ends meet, but the employees all think that they're super wealthy because they're the boss. And that's how caregivers very often feel about their clients, their employers. So everything can be absolutely beautiful during the caregiving employment relationship, and the second the person passes away, or the second the person needs different type of care and leaves their home, and now they don't have the not taxed $20 an hour that they've been used to getting all these years, they see money signs. And either somebody approaches them and says, oh, my friend just had a lawsuit and won 6 figures, you should do the same, here's the name of the lawyer. Or they're desperate and they can't necessarily jump into another situation like that, so they end up bringing a lawsuit. And I had these 4 sisters in my office. It was horrible. I actually had to walk away at one point because I started crying and I didn't want them to see me crying, but I was so upset because my client, who's this very tough man, who's just the sweetest man, but he's strong, and he broke down, which made me cry. And they were screaming at him. They said, you didn't even love her, you barely visited, and she told me how you didn't spend enough time with her, and horrible, horrible things. And according to him, obviously I wasn't there during the duration of this relationship, but according to him, that was just so hurtful and so not true, and they loved her so much. So people get really, really ugly when it's not working for them anymore. So as much as you love them, and I hate to say this because I can't tell you, if I could monetize the amount of times people have said to me, they would never come after me. They're family, they love me. Those are the ones you have to be really careful of because you've kind of let your guard down. And so I always like to make sure people understand that they're in your family, they're taking care of you, or they're taking care of your loved ones, but this is your employee. This is not your family member. This is not somebody you should trust in the way you would trust a friend or a family. They are employees that are doing this job for money. So that's my depressing soapbox speech. So what I do this is certainly not my way of getting business. This is such a small part of what I do. I really do this because I was really, really close to my grandparents. And when I've had these people in my office and I'm working with them and I'm working with their families, I just relate to them so much. And I think about my grandparents who have all passed away. And so this is how I give back. And I love being able to give this information. And the truth is, oh my gosh, so sorry. I've had so many people call me after these presentations, and I end up convincing them just go through an agency because it is so much easier. It just is. It's so much easier. And if you can afford it, if you get the right agency, you'll be so much more protected. You won't have to go through the hassle of having to do all the things I'm going to tell you that you have to do because there's a lot. So if you say, no, I'm in for the challenge, I want to do this, be aware. You mentioned insurance for employee practices. There's also what you have to have, no matter what. You don't have to have EPLI. That's extraordinarily expensive. You do have to have workers' comp insurance. That's not even a question. There's actually criminal consequences to being an employer without workers' comp insurance. And the truth is that workers' comp is a very, very fraudulent area. There's a lot of claims that are completely, fraudulent. They are made up. They have no basis in truth. In a home where your only witness is potentially a 90-year-old person who was probably not watching you, you have so much exposure because when you're helping an elderly person walk down the stairs, you're helping them, doing whatever it is. It's a very potentially physical job. It's so easy to get injured where you can put your back out, you could fall, the person falls on top of you, who knows? But workers' comp will save you. If you don't have that, it could be a nightmare. So you have to have workers' comp insurance. You have to have a payroll system set up. Writing them checks to cash or handing them cash or just writing their name into the check is illegal. It's a violation of the wage and hour rules. It's not criminal, you won't go to jail for it, but that's where all of these violations come into play. So you can't just write them a check. You have to go through a payroll system. I don't get paid for any of my referrals because it would be illegal because lawyers can't get referral fees from anyone but lawyers. But I will tell you, one of the best there's 2 payroll systems that I do recommend happily because they're very user-friendly, is Gusto and Paylocity. Those are the 2 that I really trust. And I have, there's people's names I can give you. Gusto is a completely DIY, you just do it yourself. Paylocity, there's really good reps out there, and I'm happy to give those names out because they deserve it, they do good stuff. So as long as you have your payroll system, your timekeeping system, you have workers' comp insurance, you register yourself with the EDD because you are an employer. Just like if you started your own business somewhere, that's what you are, you're an employer. So you need to make sure that you've registered with the EDD so that they know that you're an employer. If you terminate the caregiver and they go after you for unemployment, they have the right to go after you for unemployment, and you can't deny it. So many people get caught, not even just because I'm making this whole story of all these caregivers that just come after you and in such a demonic, horrible way. But it could also be very innocent, where they get fired or they left their position or they're no longer needed in that position, and they go and apply for unemployment. During COVID, unemployment was very spotlighted and talked about because there were subsidies that were given. So they were given even more than the typical unemployment. So everybody was filing for unemployment, which got me very, very, very busy because all of a sudden the EDD was saying, wait a minute, we don't have records of you. You're not in the books. Who is this employer? And they open up the books on you, and now you have an audit. That's a nightmare, not something you want to deal with. Or somebody gets injured, they apply for workers' comp, not to try to do anything hurtful to the employer. They don't know. They don't realize that this isn't how it's supposed to be, that they're not registered as an employee. And then the workers' comp, the board, they look and they're like, this is not an employee. You're not entitled to workers' comp. And then they come after the employer. So you have to make sure that the EDD knows about you, and that when you're running those checks through payroll, it's literally a company running a check through payroll. All the taxes, the employer taxes, the withholdings. Making your caregiver a 1099 is not a good idea. They're not a 1099. They should not be a 1099. They have to have a W-2 only. If there's a 1099, same exact problem. They apply for unemployment. You're not entitled to unemployment if you're an independent contractor. You don't get workers' comp insurance, workers' comp benefits if you're not an employee, if you're an independent contractor. And if the caregiver turns evil on you and brings a lawsuit against you, you're going to have a classification issue where they're going to say, and that's when everything gets opened up and you start looking at all of these issues that we were talking about in terms of all of the liability, in terms of not paying overtime and things like that. So you want to make sure they're properly classified as an employee, registered with the EDD, that you have workers' comp insurance, you don't deny unemployment, you've done proper timekeeping so that everything is very documented. If you're going to fire them, of course, you have every right to fire somebody if you don't like them, but there's rules about firing people in California. So if you have more than 4 caregivers, so it's you, employer, plus the 4. So if it's you and your husband, you and your wife, it's you guys plus 3. The total number is 5. Once that number 5 is hit, all these laws start to apply to you. There's this really very complicated law called the Fair Employment Housing Act. I could talk about that for 2 hours, but you guys will all fall asleep on me. But that's how you get a wrongful termination lawsuit, is a disability discrimination. You fired me because of the color of my skin, my nationality, my ethnicity, my sexuality, all of the things that are protected in California. They'll tell the lawyer that's why they were fired. That's not why they were fired. They were fired because they're a terrible caregiver. They're never around. They're not accountable. They dropped you when you were coming down the stairs. Who knows? But you want to make sure that you've documented all of those things. So as long as you keep proper documentation, I do have this one fabulous agency client in Los Angeles, and they actually they found us because they got sued. We got them through the lawsuit. They got us to do all their compliance, so we got them completely in compliance, and then they got sued again That is my nightmare, is when clients work with us and we do everything to make sure they do it properly and then they get sued, because that's like, to me, a slap in my face, because I've done everything I need to do to help protect them. They got sued, but because they did everything we told them to, it was a very easy lawsuit to get out of, and it cost them very, very little money. And one of the things they did, so the caregiver said she put into her timesheet, because they have timesheets, that she drove to the market and asked for mileage reimbursement. If your caregiver is driving for you, you do have to give them mileage reimbursement. It's the IRS mileage rate. I want to say it's 56 cents. I would need to double check it. It changes all the time. But you have to be calculating what their mileage is and then reimburse them in their next paycheck. So she put down, she went to Gelson's that was 30 miles away. And when I saw that, I'm like, where do you live in Los Angeles where a market is 30 miles away? Like this, I knew this was close to the city. I MapQuested it in the computer, and it was 3.2 miles away. So that was one of the reasons we were able to discredit her. There were many reasons we could discredit her, but we had all of the documentation was provided. When I asked the client, the agency, to give me the personnel file of this employee, it was like this big, because they documented everything. Every timesheet was in there, every performance issue. This case was so easy for me to defend. I felt bad charging them, but it was my time. But I'm telling you, if you do it properly and you document and you follow these rules and you reimburse, an employee should never use money, their own personal money, for anything if it's business related. So if they go to the market for you, you reimburse them, obviously, whatever they purchase for the house. And if they have to buy, if there's special equipment that they need to help you, all of that has to be reimbursed. And of course, the cars. If you're letting them use your car, you have to make sure they have proper car insurance. You get a copy of their car insurance, and you get a copy of their driver's license, that it has to be a valid driver's license. And then you reimburse. You don't, if it's your car, you don't have to reimburse for mileage, because they're not wearing and tearing their own car. That's the purpose of mileage. If they go and get you gas, you have to reimburse for the gas. So there's just a lot of little things. There is, I like to say this, but I have yet to have anybody actually do this. There's a very interesting chart in the government website that talks about the wage order. That's a lodging credit and meal credit. Technically, and I get nervous because I just see this being a little bit gray, but technically there are credits you can take out if you're providing them lodging, meaning you're giving them a room, and if you're feeding them, which obviously if they're in your home, they're most likely eating your food, you can take out a certain amount of dollars there's a amount for breakfast, an amount for lunch, an amount for dinner. Every year the amounts go a little bit up. They're still very low. Most people can't eat in Los Angeles or in California for this amount, but it's like $4 for breakfast, $6 for lunch, whatever it is. But you could take that and deduct that from their paycheck. The reason most people don't do it is because it's a really big hassle to have to sit there and do calculations. But if you're really wanting to have caregivers in your home, or you're trying to set it up for your family, and you're just trying to figure out any possible way of saving money, that's a really good way to do it. It does add up. If you're talking 3 meals a day, 2 meals a day, lodging, it definitely adds up. So that's something to think about too. The last thing I want to say, and then I'll leave this with if you guys have any questions, is that if you're going to hire a caregiver, you have to have a written caregiver agreement. And it's almost like an offer letter where you just put in there all of the terms of what the expectations are for the position. And if you write it all out, that's going to be very protective of you if you're ever having to defend a labor board claim or a lawsuit, because you have it all written of this is the expectations. And if they went outside the expectations, well, now at least you have something to argue. Say, well, that's not what we agreed to, that's not what was taking place, and it's your word against their word. Their word has a lot more validity, only because in California, we put a lot more value on employees over employers, but at least it's something to protect you. So I know I just gave you a tremendous amount of information. This is the slowest I've ever spoken consistently, so I hope you were able to follow. If you have any, I know it's a lot, so please, my number, I'm happy to give all of you my phone number right now if you want a place to write it down. Okay, it's 81, this is my office number.
We gotta get a pen sign.
Take your time, take your time. My name is Renee, R-E-N-E-E. and my last name is Noy, N-O-Y. And my law firm is called, I'm so sorry I didn't bring business cards. My law firm is called Workwise Law. One word, Workwise, W-O-R-K-W-I-S-E. Next word is law, L-A-W. My website is workwiselaw.com.
Slow down a little bit.
Work
What is your, go ahead. It's Workwise and then what?
Law, L-A-W.
All right.
Just spell your last name again.
Yeah.
N-O-Y.
Oh, that's it.
And
Yeah.
Renee.
Correct.
All right. And what was the rest?
My law firm is called Workwise Law.
Yeah.
My website is workwiselaw.com.
Oh.
My email is Renee, R-E-N-E-E, at workwiselaw.com. And are you ready for my phone number?
Yeah.
It's 818-591-6724. 6724. So just so you know, when I've had people call me to hire me to do this, what I give to you is a folder. And I am not the only lawyer that does this, and I won't be offended at all. I'd rather you just get somebody to help you than do this on your own. So hire me, hire somebody else, totally fine. But I give a folder that has all of the information. It has all the onboarding documents that everybody needs, all the hiring documents. When anybody hires an employee, there's about anywhere between 12 and 17 documents per employee. It's crazy, it's overkill, but it's necessary. And then I explain all of the stuff I just talked about. I put it into documents. I don't have a one sheet, it's too much. Although, you know what? Senior Concerns, who I worked with, that's how they found me here. I've done a lot of work with them. They have a one sheet that I help them create. So I don't know, I'm happy to give it to Blair, and I can find, I don't even know if I've seen it, but I can get it. I'm happy to send that out. So it has all the information basically that I just said. And then I'll sit down with you in a one-on-one meeting and walk you through the folder and make sure that you understand exactly what you need to do and make sure that you know when to call me. Because for the most part, you'll see me, I'll help you, you'll never see me again, you won't need me again. If you ever need me, you know to call me. And you know, the times when you want to fire somebody is the most important time to call me. Or if your caregiver gets sick or they get pregnant, and you don't know what to do, and you are, frazzled, I can walk you through that, because employees have a lot of rights in California, and there's no way, unless you're an employment lawyer or run a corporation for 30 years, you wouldn't know, because it's impossible. The one thing I didn't say, I said you have to give minimum wage, you have to give sick days. So if you guys are in this area in Camarillo, it's 3 sick days, 24 hours of sick days that you have to provide to your employees. And that's it. As long as you pay minimum wage, you give sick days, and you don't harass them, because that's always illegal no matter how many employees you have, you're really okay. That's the bulk of what you need to know. So there's a lot more, but the timekeeping issues and documentation, so important. So I hope, yes, please.
So you suggest going to an agency is the best way if you can afford it?
It's helpful. A good agency. Yes, it's because then you don't have to worry about, are you tracking their time, and are you doing all these things I'm telling you need to do? They'll cover workers' comp insurance. They have their own employment liability insurance. So yes, it's definitely helpful. Hold on, go ahead.
How do you provide proof for yourself, for your own business ahead of time? Mainly because I've been the victim of this, where they come in and they start stealing from you, and then eventually you realize that your wardrobe has been gone through and your jewelry has been gone through, and the extra money that Daddy wanted to have, because a lot of men hate to give up the fact that they once were in charge of the money in the family, and he always wanted to have at least $50 in a drawer somewhere. Well, that obviously was gone. Do you document this all ahead of time with a picture picture or something? You go through your closet and take a photo? What do you do?
Well, that's a very hard thing to answer because there's only so much you can do. Obviously, if you suspect any type of criminal activity, you terminate and call the police immediately. But yeah, if you can actually inventory all of your valuables, that's helpful. But that's outside of employment. That's criminal. So then you present that to the criminal.
You don't call the agency first, you call the police.
If you have an agency, you either one. The agency's just going to call the police too. You have to have a police report if you want to, try to prosecute or go after them. Definitely not my area of expertise, but I do know that you would call the police, and that happens a lot. I've seen that.
The nursing home as well.
It does. It's a nightmare. It's horrible. Yes.
How do you decide on the qualities of a good agency?
So there's a lot of really good agencies out there. A lot. I'm only.
Makes them good.
What's that?
What makes them good?
Well, what makes them good? Well, I don't know if they have good people. I just know that they follow the laws. So I can only do so much. What I would do is call the agencies and get yourself in there and talk to them and ask them questions. But you're not going to be able to do a wage and hour audit on these agencies and know what to look for. So I wish I did an audit for every agency, because then I can really speak to, like, here's a list, and I would so happily do that. I don't want to promote other organizations because I don't know if you guys have this, but Senior Concerns does have a list, and so they're wonderful over there. Do you guys also? So call Blair, call Blair, and she'll help you with that. I can only speak to a few that I've done actual audits for. Yes.
Okay, so I've been doing this all wrong. My mother is in her 90s. She's had somebody that she's been coming in the house. She's been writing that check, at the end of each week. And I know now that I know this, I know I have to do it right. How do I introduce this, or can I introduce this to the worker without setting myself up for a potential?
So that's a really, really good question, and I get that question actually a lot, where they all of a sudden call me. They're like, "Oh my goodness, like, now what? I've screwed this all up, and now I feel like I'm, totally exposed." And you are, because they can absolutely come after you. You don't know, they may not. And I say this all the time. So many caregivers, they take care of your family, they take care of you. Your family either passes away or they go into another facility. The caregiver goes and gets another job and lives happily ever after. That happens probably more than it doesn't. I don't hear those stories. I hear when it goes bad, right? So there's probably so many more stories. I believe that just because of my faith in humanity, that it probably won't be a problem for you. However, I see the world in, like, where you're probably going to get sued terms. So just so you know, the labor board goes back 3 years. It can go back 4 years, but only if you can show maliciousness, which is almost impossible to show. I've never seen it in 20 years of practice. So you have to be thinking in 3 years. So what I tell people, if you convert them today to employees, every day that goes by that you haven't gotten sued is one less day of exposure, right? So, and then you're just trying to run the clock out to get to those 3 years. And then even if you've done everything wrong, but now we're 6 years down the road, you're protected. There's nothing they can do about that. So my advice would be to convert them today. What I would do is try to go back into the last few years and figure out where you've had exposure. So I do these exposure analyses where you go back and you look, well, how much overtime did they do? If I was paying them properly, how much would they have received? What if it's impossible, if that's
not an issue. She works 3 days a week, 3 hours a day, so we're not talking overtime.
Then, okay, that's where most of your liability is. So that's actually really good news. So then what you want to do is you could just cut them a check for $500, $1,000, whatever you feel comfortable. Have them sign a paper that says, I acknowledge that I've received all wages owed to me, and then go forward from there. But do the conversion. Make them do everything that I just suggested, because then you don't have to worry going forward. That's how I would deal with it.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any? Yes.
You mentioned senior concerns.
Yes.
Would that be with the district, and would that be with communicating with Blair?
So Blair, I think you guys have I should let Blair speak to this because they have a very collaborative work, it seems to me. Martha is over at Senior Concerns. She's been wonderful. Blair's here, she's wonderful. Blair probably has very similar, if not the same resources. She's nodding her head. Call Blair. Blair's right there in the red shirt.
Blair sent me a wonderful sheet of agencies,
Great,
and I think that's very helpful to people.
for sure. I just don't like to, because I'm first of all, I don't want anyone to think I have an interest in this because I really don't. I literally can lose my license if I got paid off by agencies. But I get uncomfortable marketing for some when there's probably so many others that are amazing, and I haven't dealt with them. So that's why I get a little bit weird about that. But I would definitely defer to Blair's list. Look, I mean, most people would prefer to live at home if they can, obviously, if you don't require a lot of medical assistance, and if you have the money. Like most people I know with their parents or grandparents, of course they want them to live in the home that they've been living in for 50 years. That's a beautiful thing to be able to do. But it's not always realistic because it's so expensive and to have these caregivers. So, but you don't have to worry about anything if you're in assisted living. Yes.
How does long-term care insurance play into it? So for instance, if you have a long-term care insurance policy, so you're going through an agency, how does that play into it? Are you still the employer and you still need to be really, because you might get a list of you have to go through these agencies.
Right, so that is amazing if you have that, because and obviously it depends on your policy. It doesn't protect you from anything I'm talking about. It's just funding, the wages of those employees, but you still need to do it properly because they're not the employer. They're just providing They're just providing the monetary funds to be able to pay for it. But yeah, if you have that, I mean, I've had a lot of clients that they have so much money in that long-term disability, which that can save you. So it's incredible, but you still have to follow the rules.
Would you suggest if someone did want to go through an agency that they come to you at least to say, these are the following questions that probably should be asked of the agency? I mean, we have lists of questions that are important to ask, but I'm just curious if there's a way to vet an agency.
So somebody called me and asked me that question, and I thought it was interesting because instead of me sitting in my office waiting for the agency to hire me, I said, you know what, pay me for an hour of my time, and I will get on the phone with that agency and I'll do a very mini audit to see what they're doing. And they did it, and it was great, and I felt very comfortable, and I said, go with them, they're wonderful. They've sent me documentation that the agency provides to the employer, to their client, and I review the agreements, and if it looks good, then if you have the money to do it, it makes your life exponentially easier. But they are charging a significant premium, and it's because they have to. It's not even that they're just greedy business owners. They have a lot of expenses, and it's very hard to run a business in California, and there's so much potential liability. Their insurance costs are through the roof, so they have to make a profit, otherwise they'll close it down. So it's tough. But yeah, if the agency is doing it properly and you have the money to do it, I would 100% opt for agency. The long-term care insurance pays for the cost of the caregivers. But if you don't have timekeeping and you don't have all the other workers' comp insurance, that doesn't cover it. They don't become an employer. They're just giving you money to deal with it.
You are.
You're still the employer. Yeah, exactly. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Is there a website to look for complaints regarding agencies and their labor practices?
It's public record. You kind of have to dig to find it. But yeah, these complaints are all public record. So yeah, you can. It's awful. It's awful. There's so much money that can be given to the caregivers if there's no compliance. And really, the thing that's so bothersome is there's no damages. They've been paid, and it's not like they're going to get in trouble because they're not in trouble. It's just a way for them to make a really nice profit.
One other comment. The other issue, private versus agency, is what happens when the person doesn't show up, or is sick, or needs a pregnancy leave. If you're working through an agency,
they'll cover you.
yes,
I know.
They are responsible for finding a replacement and filling the staffing request.
It's true.
If you're doing it privately, you start asking the family member, you know, you start
But
scrambling.
that's why so often I don't know if I'd have to think about this. I don't know if I've ever dealt with employer, one caregiver. It's always the family. You know, it's always and they all cover for each other. But you're right. If you're relying on somebody and they don't show up at your door and you don't have any extra coverage, it's a really big problem. So I don't disagree. Agency gives you a lot more protection. There's no question. I am very pro agency as long as but it's just expensive. So I get the calls of I can't afford an agency. So what do I do? And so that's how this comes into play.
But can you afford the liability if something happens?
No, I don't know. Unless you're truly a millionaire, no, you cannot. You cannot. It's awful. Yes.
Do I understand that this, what you told us our responsibilities are if we hire somebody private, pertains to both part-time and full-time? So if you're only having someone come in a couple hours a day, you still need to do all of the documentation.
You still need to do all the documentation, but like your situation, I'm so relieved for you that it's only 3 hours a day because there's no overtime at all. Really what you're gonna get in trouble for is there's a wage statement violation that you didn't, because you didn't provide wage statements, so it's obviously wrong wage statements. You could get into trouble for not providing sick pay. You could get in trouble for just misclassification. I mean, there are other things that come into play, but your liability is so much reduced if you have a couple hours, 3 hours.
You still have to register with the EDD?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're still an employee. Yeah, 100. Yes, absolutely. Their sick time, just so you know, it's accrual. So for this is too much probably, but for every 30 hours work, they get 1 hour of sick. So if they're only 3 hours a week or 3 hours a day, they're going to have so much less sick time. So that's helpful too. All right, everybody should have my information. If you don't, Blair certainly does. I'm more than happy to give you guys free information if you want to call me. If you have a few minute question, I'm more than happy. If it's going to be more than that and you want me to sit down with you, then I'll ask you to engage me. If you're like, I don't want to listen to you talk so fast anymore, I have other lawyers I'm happy to recommend. So anyway, but thank you guys so much for listening.